It began with a sound they had almost forgotten, not the thud of boots or the distant rumble of artillery, but something softer yet electric. Cheers, laughter, a crack like a gunshot, but followed by clapping, not screams. The year was 1943, and hundreds of German prisoners of war, captured in North Africa, were marched into the barbed wire enclosures of the American Midwest. They expected silence, discipline, maybe the barking of guards. Instead, from beyond the camp fence drifted the unmistakable roar of a crowd, carried by the summer wind. They pressed closer to the wire, squinting toward the source. What they saw made them blink twice. There, under the bright American sun, young women in skirts and caps were running bases with a speed and strength they had been told women did not possess. Bats swung, balls cracked, gloves snapped, and the stands, yes. The stands were filled with families cheering as if this were the most natural thing in the world. But for these men, veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps, it was not natural at all. Back home, sport had been a matter of pride and propaganda. Football belonged to men, boxing belonged to men, strength was masculine. While women were consigned to the domestic sphere, Hitler's Reich had drilled it into every child women should bear sons, not swing bats. And now, just days after capture, still in the dust-stained uniforms of a defeated army, they stood in shock. One prisoner, later writing in his diary, scrawled the words Frauen spielen Baseball. Ich dachte, ich träume. Women play baseball. I thought I was dreaming. The guards smirked at their confusion. To the Americans, the sight was ordinary, even patriotic. The All-American Girls Professional Baseball League had been founded only a year earlier, in 1942, to keep baseball alive while men went overseas. But to these POWs, it was like watching the laws of nature bend. What would you have thought if the world you knew told you women were weak, only to see them cheered as athletes before your very eyes? The baseball diamond glittered like a stage set for their first lesson in America's contradictions, according to camp reports. Some POWs begged guards for permission to sit closer, not just to watch the game, but to understand it. The guards allowed it, sometimes even marched them out in small groups to act as groundskeepers, watering the grass or chalking the lines before a game began. Imagine the feeling a man who had carried a rifle across the desert, now stooping to sweep the dust from a field where women would soon sprint, dive, and hit with a force that seemed impossible. Every base stolen. Every ball driven into the outfield carried a message more devastating than propaganda leaflets ever could. And the cheering, it was louder than anything they had heard in years. The Reich had ordered its citizens to cheer. Here, it was voluntary, joyful, infectious. As twilight settled and the field lights flickered on, the POWs lingered by the fences. Some tried to hide their fascination. Others whispered among themselves in disbelief. One, an older sergeant, spat and muttered barbarisch. Es ist ein Circus. Barbaric, a circus. But his tone betrayed unease, not contempt. Archival sources state that the camp's American officers sometimes encouraged this exposure. They knew the games were more than sport. They were demonstrations of a society that did not fit Nazi caricature, a society where women worked in factories, drove trucks, and even played professional baseball. And so, beneath the watchtowers and the barbed wire, under the stars of a land they barely understood, the first cracks began to appear in the prisoners' certainties. But what they saw next, as they began to compare their memories of Germany with the abundance of America, would challenge them even more. For most of the German prisoners, the world had been simple before capture. Their youth was shaped by the voices of teachers, drill masters, and radio announcers repeating the same mantra: a woman's duty was to the home, the cradle, and the kitchen. Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church. This was the trinity Hitler's regime demanded. Athletics, competition, and public spectacle belonged to men. Women who reached beyond those limits were mocked as unfeminine or condemned as degenerate. Now, under the wide skies of Iowa and Illinois, that certainty collapsed with every swing of a bat. According to one camp interpreter's notes, a group of POWs debated furiously after a game. It cannot be serious, one insisted. They are pretending for the war effort. It is theater. But another, younger man shook his head. 9. The crowd believes it. They cheer like we cheer for football. The indoctrination still held, but the cracks widened. Archival reports from the U.S. Army indicate that many POWs were stunned less by the game itself than by the public acceptance of it. In Germany, state propaganda controlled what people were allowed to see. Films showed women in tidy uniforms typing, farming, or nursing. But no film ever showed a woman running full speed, sliding into second base, and standing up with dust in her hair to the roar of a crowd. It was a reality that mocked the propaganda of Joseph Goebbels. The American woman, Nazi broadcasts claimed, is decadent, frivolous, and corrupt. And yet here, on a July afternoon, she was strong, competitive, and adored. How would you reconcile such a contradiction if you were in their shoes? Would you cling to old beliefs or trust your own eyes? At night, when the lights dimmed in the barracks, the prisoners whispered about what they had seen. Some laughed nervously. If this is America, no wonder they build so many planes. Their women must build them, too. Others bristled, unable to accept the image. A few men even confessed admiration, though always in hushed tones, fearing ridicule from comrades. According to a Red Cross report from 1944, guards occasionally overheard debates stretching into the small hours. The POWs argued not just about baseball, but about the broader puzzle if America entrusted women with bats, fields, and public acclaim. What else did it entrust them with? Work in factories, votes, and elections? Could it be true that women there lived freer than most men in Germany? The questions gnawed at them like an unhealed wound. The Reich had promised them that America was weak, a mongrel nation destined to crumble under its own decadence. But reality defied every word. Women did not appear weak. Families in the stands seemed prosperous and unafraid. Even the stadium lights bright, steady, immune to blackout, were a rebuke to the endless nights of darkness back home. According to quartermaster records, the POWs were issued rations that, though meager by American standards, often surpassed what their families received in Germany: bread, meat, even occasional sweets. To see American women not only eat well but thrive in sport was another reminder the propaganda had lied. One prisoner, recalling the moment years later, admitted, "That day I knew the Reich was finished, not because of tanks, but because of women who could hit a baseball." Doubt was dangerous for a soldier. Doubt meant weakness, betrayal, shame. And yet it spread silently in the camps, like ivy creeping up the walls. Each game the POWs glimpsed through the fence was another blow to the iron certainty of their youth. Some tried to fight it. They repeated slogans, mocked the players, or turned their backs. But others, quietly, allowed the possibility to grow. Perhaps strength did not belong only to men. Perhaps a society that let its women play baseball was not weaker, but stronger. And this realization, though still fragile, would only deepen as the POWs learned that those women were not entertainers, but part of a national league drawing crowds of thousands. But what they discovered next, that America had built an entire institution around these athletes, would astonish them even more. By 1943, America's young men were scattered across the globe fighting in Tunisia, flying over Europe, island hopping in the Pacific. Baseball, the national pastime, faced an uncertain future. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had written in his famous Green Light Letter of 1942 that baseball must continue to keep morale alive at home. But with so many male athletes in uniform, who would fill the stadiums, swing the bats, and keep the spirit of the game alive? The answer shocked not only Americans at first, but also the German prisoners watching from behind the wire. Women, ordinary women, drafted not by the military, but by scouts searching small towns and factories for talent. According to league records, more than 500 women would eventually play in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, AAGPBL, for the POWs. The sight of this mobilization was as incomprehensible as it was undeniable. A government that trusted women with factories, trucks, and even airplanes now trusted them with the nation's beloved game. Founded in 1942 by Philip K. Wrigley, owner of the Chicago Cubs and the chewing gum empire. The league began with just 4 teams: the Rockford Peaches, Racine Bells, Kenosha Comets, and South Bend Blue Sox. The uniforms shocked Europeanized short skirts paired with baseball caps, a mix of tradition and rebellion. Archival photographs show packed stands, sometimes 4,000 to 6,000 fans per game. Children waved flags, fathers shouted encouragement, and mothers cheered with pride. For the POWs, accustomed to rationing, blackouts, and war-torn streets, the scene was surreal. Here, war did not silence the crowd, it made them louder. One prisoner later confessed in an interview, "I thought America was desperate. But if they could spare thousands to watch women play baseball, they were not desperate. They were rich in ways we could not imagine." According to U.S. Army camp records, some German prisoners were occasionally taken outside the wire to work in agricultural fields or even as groundskeepers for stadiums. That meant closer glimpses of the League in action, for many. It was the first time they had seen thousands of civilians gathered in one place without fear of bombs falling overhead. The crack of the bat echoed across the field. The smell of roasted peanuts and hot dogs wafted through the air, luxuries unimaginable in wartime Germany. To their astonishment, these foods were not reserved for officers or elites. Ordinary Americans, even children, ate them casually in the stands. Imagine the dissonance. Men who had stormed deserts and faced death now stood stunned at the sight of a teenage girl spilling mustard on her dress as she cheered for a woman sliding into home plate. Could any propaganda survive such a moment? For the POWs, the AAG-PBL became more than entertainment. It was a mirror reflecting a society utterly different from the one they knew in Nazi Germany. Strength was defined by uniformity and control. Here, strength seemed to come from variety, spontaneity, even play. One diary fragment found decades later in Bavaria read, "They have women playing baseball." Yes, but it is not ridiculous. It is serious. They are proud. The crowd adores them. Perhaps it is we who are ridiculous. The League's existence carried another, quieter message. America had so much confidence in its industrial and military power that it could afford to let women shine in sport while men fought abroad. Germany, by contrast, dragged its women deeper into hardship, yet never permitted them glory. Statistics drove the point home. By 1944, League attendance surpassed 250,000 in a single season. Teams traveled by bus, played doubleheaders, and even received national press coverage, according to American newspapers. The best players earned salaries higher than those of many factory workers. For the POWs, still writing letters to families enduring hunger and air raids. The sheer scale was dizzying. How could a nation at war sustain such abundance, and why did it choose to celebrate women in public, rather than conceal them? The questions festered. Every bat swung was another crack in the edifice of ideology. But what unsettled them most was not the crowd, the food, or even the scale. It was the growing realization that these women were not a sideshow. They were heroes in their own right, admired and immortalized. And as admiration turned to envy, a deeper cultural clash began to unfold. In the barracks at night, the prisoners whispered comparisons they could not silence. Back in Germany, the blackout curtains smothered every window, leaving entire cities swallowed in darkness. Bombers droned overhead, and the Luftwaffe struggled to hold the skies. Food was scarce, tobacco scarcer, according to quartermaster records. By 1944, the average German civilian rationed less than 500 calories a day thin bread, watery soup, a scrap of meat once or twice a week. And yet here, just across the wire, stadium lights blazed against the night like a second sun. Fans ate roasted peanuts, popcorn, and frankfurters as if the war did not exist. The POWs had been taught that America was soft, decayed, mongrel. But how could a decayed nation feed its children sweets, light entire ballparks, and cheer women who played baseball with the vigor of soldiers? One guard overheard a prisoner mutter bitterly, "If this is weakness, may God make us weak." Fragments of POW diaries tell the story of disbelief tipping into envy. One young corporal described watching a Rockford Peach sprint across the outfield. "She ran faster than many men in our regiment. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. I do not understand this world. In Germany, they would laugh. Here, they celebrate." The contradiction was unbearable. To admit admiration meant betraying the Reich, but to deny it meant lying to one's own eyes. Archival interviews decades later revealed that some men clung to denial, insisting it was American propaganda theater, yet others admitted that in those moments, they began to feel ashamed not of losing a war, but of belonging to a society that chained half its population to the stove while America's women played under floodlights. Even their own rations drove the contrast deeper. In the camps, German POWs often received white bread, margarine, meat, and coffee substitutes luxuries compared to their families back home. Letters from mothers and wives spoke of turnip bread, ersatz coffee, and the terror of Allied air raids. The prisoners could hardly reply. One man confessed privately to a guard that he no longer sent part of his bread ration home, fearing it would only remind his family of their deprivation. And then, as if to mock his guilt, he watched Americans buy candy bars at the ballpark as casually as Germans bought war bonds. How would you feel, watching a child lick ice cream while your own family starved thousands of miles away? Baseball itself was a revelation. The crack of the bat was unlike the crack of rifles. The rhythm of the game patient, strategic, punctuated by bursts of explosive action, seemed to embody something foreign to men drilled in blitzkrieg. Here was a sport that was slow yet thrilling, communal yet individual. To see women at its center was more than a cultural oddity. It was an earthquake. It implied that America's definition of strength included joy, leisure, and equality concepts the Reich dismissed as decadence. One sergeant admitted in a camp interrogation, if they allow women to be this free, perhaps their men fight harder because they have more to return to. It was not weakness, but another kind of strength. The greatest shock came when the POWs learned that newspapers printed women's baseball scores on the same page as men's war headlines. To them, this was inconceivable. Germany hid its failures, glorified its armies, and erased women from public achievement. America, by contrast, seemed to boast, while our men fight abroad, our women fill the stadiums at home. The clash of these two worlds was unbearable and yet impossible to ignore. The Reich had promised them invincibility, but America's ballparks whispered another truth. A society's strength was measured not only in tanks and planes, but in its ability to let even its women shine. And what the POWs witnessed next, the way each swing of the bat shattered, more than baseballs would finally pierce the armor of ideology. Every swing of the bat carried a message louder than propaganda leaflets could ever shout. For German prisoners raised to see women as fragile, the sight of them stealing bases and hitting doubles was an unbearable contradiction. Yet the contradiction only grew stronger with repetition. Each game they glimpsed from behind the wire, each roar of the crowd, chipped away at the ideological walls the Reich had built inside their minds. One POW, decades later, told an interviewer, "It was not the bombs that defeated me. It was watching those women. I realized I had been lied to all my life." Could you imagine that moment when a single baseball game does more damage to your beliefs than an entire battlefield? To American fans, the games were entertainment. To the POWs, they were symbols in motion. A woman sprinting home under the arc of a fly ball became the embodiment of freedom. A fielder diving into the dirt and rising triumphantly with the ball in hand became a challenge to everything Joseph Goebbels had broadcast for years. According to Red Cross observers, some German prisoners began sketching the players in their notebooks. Not caricatures, not mockery portraits. Quiet admiration for men trained to sneer. Even drawing such images was an act of rebellion against the Reich's worldview. And what they saw next only deepened the rebellion. These women were not shunned, but celebrated as heroes of the home front. But admiration was dangerous. Inside the barracks, the most loyal Nazis, so-called true believers, watched carefully. Anyone expressing too much praise for America risked being labeled weak. Fights broke out in whispers, then in fists. A guard's report from 1944 describes a confrontation. One prisoner struck another for calling the Rockford Peaches better athletes than some men I know. The fight ended with both in the infirmary, but the guard wrote, the wound was deeper than the flesh. It was in their ideology. That wound grew with every game, even among the hardliners. Doubt was contagious. If women could play baseball this well, what else could they do? Could they vote? Lead command questions that would have been absurd in Berlin were now asked silently in Iowa. Archival letters home revealed the shift in tone. Early messages from the POWs spoke with bravado. We are being treated well, but America is soft. Months later, the words changed. It is different here. Their women are everywhere. They are strong. Our newspapers did not tell the truth. According to a 1945 psychological report, Some prisoners admitted that seeing women in roles of visibility and respect made them doubt not only Nazi ideology, but the entire foundation of German tradition. The Reich had built a world of rigid hierarchies. America's baseball field suggested another path, messy. Surprising, but resilient. For years, they had been told that America was a land of weakness, a place where chaos and indulgence ruled. Yet every time a woman sent the ball sailing over the outfield, the illusion shattered. Strength here was not a march in lockstep, but a swing taken freely, cheered by strangers who had chosen to come. One POW later summarized it simply: "When I saw them play, I understood why Germany could not win. They were not fighting only men, they were fighting an entire people." And still, the most astonishing realization lay ahead: that baseball games, cigarettes, and small acts of humanity would not merely amuse the prisoners, but begin to transform them from within. By late 1944, the games were no longer just spectacles. They had become turning points in the prisoners' inner lives. Guards noticed it first. Men who once marched stiff-backed now walked to work assignments with quieter eyes, less sure of themselves. The shock of women's baseball was only one element in a larger unraveling. Combined with abundant rations, warm treatment, and the absence of constant fear, it eroded what Nazi discipline had carved deep inside them. One camp officer wrote in his report, "They watch our women play and cheer. Their silence afterward is not hostility, it is confusion." That confusion soon grew into something else: curiosity. Cigarettes shared by guards, coffee offered on a cold morning, the chance to sit on bleachers and watch an inning or two in the open air. These were not acts of propaganda, but of humanity. And humanity, the POWs discovered, could be stronger than threats. A prisoner once asked an American sergeant, "Why do you let them play? Does it not shame your men?" The sergeant only laughed. "Why would it? They play better than I do." The answer struck the prisoner harder than any fist. Strength in America was not diminished by women's success, it was multiplied by it. Would you have admitted it, if you were in his shoes? That the enemy's laughter made more sense than your own ideology. Inside the barracks, the tone shifted. Men who once mocked the players now spoke of them with admiration. Some even memorized their names: Dorothy Kamenchek, Sophie Curies, Mildred Deegan, as if clinging to proof that the world was larger than what Berlin had told them. The most loyal Nazis still resisted, but they were fewer now. Their voices drowned in doubt. According to Red Cross observers, tensions eased as more prisoners accepted the reality the Reich's vision of women, of strength, of America itself, was false. Many of these men would remain in America until 1946, long after Germany surrendered. By then, the games, the food, the lights, and the kindness had left permanent marks when repatriated. Some carried these memories back to ruined cities and silent households. They spoke quietly of what they had seen: women in uniforms of a different kind, swinging bats and winning cheers. Years later, in oral histories, former POWs confessed that it was not just the defeat on the battlefield that shaped them, but these glimpses of a freer world. "We learned democracy from baseball," one said, not in speeches, but in the sight of women running bases while crowds cheered them as equals. The irony was cruel. The Reich had sought to harden them into unthinking instruments. Instead, captivity in America, where even sport was infused with freedom, made them human again. Every cheer they heard through the fences was a hammer blow against tyranny. Every stolen base was a reminder that strength could mean inclusion, not exclusion. And every bat swung by a woman on those sunlit fields planted seeds that would grow long after the war ended. The prisoners had arrived as soldiers of an empire. They would leave as witnesses to another truth: that true power is not measured in jackboots, but in the courage to let others shine. And when they returned home, it was those memories, fragile, persistent, that they carried into the ruins of the Reich.